Welcome to Inspired Change, a new inspirational and motivational broadcast that strives to empower men in a positive way, designed to educate, empower, and inspire even the busiest individual on the go over that first cup of coffee. Please join me in welcoming Gunter, international psychologist, author, speaker, and producer.
Welcome everybody to another episode, another podcast of Inspired Change. So in the last podcast I spoke about the issue of mental health, and I'm going to interchange that with the whole notion of mental well-being because I think the two basically interrelate. And in that podcast, I focused on drawing a distinction between mental distress and mental disorders as opposed to mental well-being. One of the reasons for that is because frequently when people now speak about mental health, the first thing that they tend to think about is anxiety, depression, OCD, ADD, ADHD, suicidality, and so on. And, you know, there's good reason for, in a sense, doing that, but it's not actually where we want to necessarily place our focus. Yes, these things are a significant issue in our community, and, you know, we want to try to get on top of that, especially us as men. So my idea in regards to having meaningful conversations about mental well-being, about mental health, is that we need to look at how we get to that place where we're psychologically disturbed or distressed. So in this episode, one of the things that I want to focus on very clearly is establishing a fairly good framework for that. Okay, so quite ironically, what you're going to find is that I'm going to start off with physical well-being, physical health. The tendency in our culture has been to see body and mind as a binary, one or the other, whereas in fact that's probably not the best way to look at how we as human beings in fact function. The reality is that we're a complex, interrelated set of systems ranging from the electrical to the biochemical to the biomechanical to the neurological and then to the psychological. And much of this is really strongly influenced by the social context that we find ourselves in. And don't mistake this particular issue. There are very specific issues, mental disorders, mental diseases that are actually organically based. One of the things as a clinician that I often have to do is try to identify whether someone has actually got a neurological problem or a problem that has manifested itself psychologically but is actually of an physiological nature. I'll give you a really good example of that. When I was coming out of university, I actually came into the workforce at a time where Australia had the first recession. So at that time, all jobs for psychologists were basically frozen, and you know you had the dilemma of either not being experienced enough or being overqualified, or simply, yes, we've got a job but we can't pay you because there's no money, there's no budget. And so one of the things that I had to do, because I had a young family, was to go, okay, I need a job. Simple as that. So what is it that I can do? And I'd had experience working with kids with disabilities, and I actually really, really enjoyed that up to a degree. Again, you know, one of the things that often happens in jobs like that is that we resource short, and that was always an issue for me, is that working with kids that had special needs, a lot of times we were struggling to get, you know, the complete set of resources that we needed to be, you know, of optimum help to the children. One of the things that I noticed in the paper at the time was that there was a job available in a nursing home, and I thought, well, you know what, I'm going to give it a shot. So I got an interview, and I went and saw the matron, who opened the interview up with, well, I don't necessarily employ men in nursing. Well, I went, oh, okay, the interview's over, I might as well go home. But then she said, look, let's just have a chat. And so we chatted for about 15, 20 minutes, and she took me for a walk around the ward, and each ward had, sections, bedrooms with generally 4 clients or patients in each of the bedrooms, and then there were the occasional sort of single rooms for an elderly person. Okay. At the end of the round, she said, look, I'm willing to give you a trial. So she did. Now, the reason why I'm telling this story is because, I don't have a degree in medicine, and I don't have a degree in the neurosciences. So what this ended up being for me was an extraordinarily good learning curve, because I certainly learnt about what happens to us in old age, which can be pretty scary at times when you get too deep into it. But also one of the things that became very evident is the relationship between mind and body. Now, at the time, a lot of the patients that I was caring for were not suffering from Alzheimer's. They were generally often suffering from dementia. And it's possible that at the time we didn't necessarily differentiate effectively between the two, but most of the people that I was working with were certainly in their late 70s, early 80s and 90s. Now, one of the things that I picked up very, very quickly, and with much help from the sisters in the unit, was that you really had to watch, especially some of the old ladies, because they wouldn't hydrate properly. Okay, so you go, okay, well, they're just going to get thirsty. And the fact of the matter is that they don't. One of the consequences of dehydration in the elderly is they actually lose touch with reality. They go into a sort of demented space, but it's not actually real dementia, it's that they dehydrated. So when you give them fluids and you top up their fluids again, their mind starts to clear. Okay, so it brings me back to the point that I was making, is that the binary perspective of mind and body can actually, it is a nonsense for a start, but we also need to, in a sense, think about body, neurology, and psychology as a very succinctly interrelated set of systems. So why do you think I'm bringing this up now when I'm talking, hopefully, mainly to a lot of men, because we tend to be somewhat mentally neglectful. We tend to look after ourselves physically. Okay, so we tend to go to the gym and, some of us focus on eating well. Well, because that's not enough. Okay, so let me start in this context. So what are we talking about when we're talking about mental well-being? Well, psychologically, it means my enjoyment of life, essentially, my sense of joie de vivre. And also the issue of resilience, coming back from adversity, trauma, right? So some people refer to it as bounce back, all right? Now, the other thing that often is forgotten in the issue of mental health, mental well-being, is that part of the picture is also to be able to set and fulfill goals, to have aspiration in a sense, and with that hangs together the sense of purpose and meaning that we ascribe to our life. It is also, and this is part of our interaction with our environment, really about us having the capacity to have solid relationships, intimate relationships, and to maintain those, not just come and go, but actually, keep them rolling. And some of us, some people, I was reading, as experiencing 50 years, 60 years married. Now, some mightn't be married in a legal sense, but they've been together for that amount of time. Now, I have a lot of respect for that. That is just brilliant. Okay? So our capacity of being well mentally comes essentially in those categories. Now, the big question often that I get posed is, well, what sort of influences that whole structure? And so one of the things that we need to factor in is things like living environment, living conditions, the issue about employment, about education, about being able to live free of discrimination and violence, and to have an opportunity to access economic resources. Right? So that's one area. The other area is a positive sense of who I am and where I belong. Right? Now that I can expand in a much broader detail, and I'll do that, but not right now. So the other aspect of this is that what are my, in a sense, internal dispositions like? So let me come back to that whole thing about the onion. So, what are my attitudes, beliefs, values? How do I think? What's the quality of that thinking? How does that affect me emotionally? How do I really establish myself in my behaviours? Do I, for example, over-exercise rather than not exercise enough? Do I eat too much? Do I eat too little? All those things are fundamentally really, really, really important. Now, in this podcast, let me start off with a very, very simple frame that I go through in my mind when I sit down with someone for the first time and try to get a sense of where they're at in that realm of mental well-being. So the first thing I do is we have a chat about how you're sleeping. Now, for years, one of the things that I have picked up constantly is that we have a culture that suffers collectively from sleep deprivation. We don't get enough good quality sleep. Some people may sleep a lot, but they actually don't have good quality. We also have a pattern that's called early morning waking frequently, which is, somewhere around 2:30, 3:30 in the morning, you're suddenly awake and your mind is just processing. It's just going off the rails. Now, the deeper the emotional stress or distress or disturbance, the more likely your sleep's going to be disturbed. Now, some of us add actually a little bit of spice to the equation and, really make sure that we don't get a really good night's sleep by drinking too much alcohol, by taking other drugs, by overstimulating ourselves with things like screens, social media, and work. So we're talking about anything that has a tendency to overstimulate us. Okay, and our culture has become one with overstimulation. As I keep talking about, how we're functioning in our society today, we actually sort of generally exist in this state of hyper-arousal. We do too much, we're over-focused on doing too much. If we don't do enough, we can't relax. So the first challenge that I'm going to put to all of you who are listening to me is take a look at your sleep quantity, the sleep quality, and your sleep hygiene. Now let me talk a little bit about each. Let me start off with sleep hygiene. Sleep hygiene is fundamentally the things you do before you actually get to bed and when you do them. So some people eat very, very, very late and then go to bed and expect to have a good night's sleep. That doesn't work well. So the idea is that you need, in a sense, to prep for going to bed and going to sleep. So give yourself enough space between the last major meal, and in fact, I probably suggest don't graze after dinner at all, so that your system can settle down. The other thing is, if you're going to drink alcohol, do so extremely moderately, because it is going to interfere with your sleep. Most people that I work with who stop drinking before bed for 30 days find that within a few days even, their sleep quality improves significantly. They feel a lot better. Okay, so the other issue with this sort of coming down, in actual fact, a calming down, not just coming down from activity, is to really get yourself into a mental space where you're prepared just to go comfortably into a state of relaxation and then to sleep. The more you do that, the better the quality of the sleep's going to be. And that's the important bit. So it's not just what you do before going to bed, but now we're talking about improving the quality of your sleep. And that comes a lot from what you do before you go to sleep. Now, the major problem that I have with essentially most of my teenage clients and young adults, they have a tendency to burn the candle at both ends and put the blowtorch to the test in the middle. What do I mean with that? Well, a lot of teenagers that I work with, on average, only get about 5 hours sleep. Why? Because they're usually on some device till some ungodly hour in the morning and then expect to get up, get organised and get to school. And by definition, life becomes miserable. Okay, so, for teenagers, if you're not getting 8 hours and then sometimes more than that 8 hours sleep, you're going to struggle intellectually in terms of your cognitive function, but you're also going to struggle emotionally, and the two are going to rub off on each other. So you're not going to perform well. And this is the issue too with adults. A lot of my adult clients will talk about how they're struggling to get to sleep, how once they're asleep, it's really easy to wake up, and then if they've got something on their mind, it just gets from bad to worse. So, my view, and I know this from my own personal experience, if I get less than 7 hours sleep 3 days in a row, I'm fatigued. I don't function very well, so I don't let that happen. So the first came off the rank in, putting down a solid foundation for mental well-being is to check your sleep. Now, in order to improve that, the next most important aspect in getting there is practicing some form of relaxation. And I usually recommend to people learning how to abdominally breathe, because that switches on your parasympathetic nervous system rather than keeping the sympathetic nervous system on. Secondly, progressive muscle relaxation, because the muscle groups in the body tend to be a bit like a battery and stored tension, and they habituate to that. So after a while, those muscles think that level of tension is normal, and they'll keep it there. And one of the things that happens is that we can get headaches or migraines from that. And the third element is doing some form of deep state relaxation, meditation, or mindfulness practice on a regular basis. And this is the challenge that I'm going to put out to all of you. When you start doing this, and I'm hopefully inspiring you to firstly take a look at your habits, and secondly, change them to something that's healthy, that's something that's going to focus and elicit well-being, real well-being. And so in that sense, what I want you to do is take a challenge for 30 days and practice abdominal breathing, progressive muscle relaxation, and some form of self-hypnosis, mindfulness training, meditation. I know it's not easy. Most of us sort of, do it a couple of times and then drop off. But the return on investment on that is just massive. It's really, really important. Okay, herein ends the lesson for this week's podcast. In the next session, I'm going to talk some more about exercise and nutrition, although I'm not a nutritionist or dietitian. So if you need or want some professional advice in that area, please seek someone out. But I'm just going to, talk a little bit about my personal experience and also what I've learnt myself in, working in this body-mind space. So, again, please think about this. Please take up the challenge. Because as I said, the return on investment in this is enormous. Generally speaking, as blokes, if we can get to 55 without a major health crisis, we actually have the opportunity to live a good, healthy, extended life. Until next time, this is me signing off.
Thank you, Gunter, and thank you for listening to Inspire Change with Gunter. Again, if you have any questions or comments or ideas for a show, you can email development@noirtainment.com. That's development@noirtainment.com. Thank you, and thank you for listening.